Ladies and gentlemen, as predicted and discussed many times on this channel, it appears we are officially and firmly in the then they fight you phase. And indeed, it appears to be time to prepare for war. This is not a drill. Let's jump in. No time for intros today. Let's get right into it. Today's video is going to cover some of the evidence that leads us to the conclusion I just stated, and then critically, what can we do about it? What are the different tools at our disposal, and what actions should you be urgently taking if you haven't already, or helping your friends and family take if they haven't already either? You're not going to want to miss a thing from today's video. And so let's talk about Operation Chokepoint, okay? When we had Custodia Bank, they applied to basically become a bank. And what that looks like is you get what's called a master account with the Fed. So you as a bank can keep reserves with the Fed. Custodia was not like most banks in the sense that they proposed a business model where they fully reserve their customers' deposits. Sounds crazy, right? But basically, customers could deposit funds with the comfort of knowing that Custodia is not going out and loaning those out and having fractionalized reserves, which the whole system is based on. And so instead of the bank making money on the spread of interest rates between what they loan and what they pay their depositors, something like a Custodia model would make money off of good old-fashioned fees. In light of what has most recently happened, this sounds incredibly appealing, right? Every regulator must surely look at this and say, this is great, this is a very low-risk business model. And yet, Custodia was denied in their application. Why? Because Custodia promised to serve crypto-related customers. And in fact, Caitlin Long has now revealed, this was in an interview she did with Pomp, she's probably said it elsewhere, she was not in a position to reveal this earlier, but has now revealed that there was collusion between the Fed and the White House via the OCC to deny the application to Custodia. All during a week where the FOMC had a blackout, meaning they don't do anything. And yet all of this orchestrated, coordinated action suddenly took place. So that was really the start of it. Now you've had Silicon Valley Bank. We'll talk about that more. You've had Silvergate. You've had Signature Bank. So Signature wasn't even insolvent. The FDIC just said, nah, we're gonna take control. Don't care. We're gonna literally take control of you. They were not insolvent. They did not make a mistake to the degree that Silicon Valley Bank did. Furthermore, in the case of Signature, there was a stipulation added that any buyer had to give up the crypto business at the bank. This is as obvious and out in the open a choke point as you could possibly get. Why did the US government arbitrarily shut down Signature Bank? Well, it's one of the main banks that a lot of US-based custodians use, whether it's crypto exchanges or what have you. And so you've now seen all these centralized on and off ramps getting squeezed. They're reporting suspensions, for example, in ACH deposits and withdrawals. We can see this example from Kraken. Now, to be fair, you could still do wire transfers, but we can see the direction that all of this is heading. The theater is burning and they are systematically closing and narrowing the exits. There's seemingly new limitations every day for how much you can deposit from your bank into a known crypto exchange. This is happening not just in the US. I've seen reports from the UK, Scotland, all sorts of other geographies where this is happening. Coinbase, the most notable US-based exchange, was served a Wells notice. Now, to be fair, Coinbase certainly does have unregistered securities that it offers, probably lots of them, so there probably is some truth to the matter, some legitimacy to that matter, if you believe in the legitimacy of existing regulation, but it's nonetheless yet another step. Block was just attacked in a report by a notable short seller, Hindenburg Research, that has called it fraudulent, that has attacked Cash App for lack of compliance and all these different things. The White House economic report had 15% of the entire report talking about how Bitcoin and crypto are dangerous and useless and have no value. Let's take a look at some select passages. So first, although the underlying technologies are a clever solution for the problem of how to execute transactions without a trusted authority, crypto assets currently do not offer widespread economic benefits. They are largely speculative investment vehicles and are not an effective alternative to fiat currency. They are too risky at present to function as payment instruments or to expand financial inclusion, even despite all the examples we see in emerging markets that the White House chooses to bluntly ignore. Later on, we see certain innovations such as Fed Now and a potential US CBDC could help bring the US financial infrastructure into the digital era in a clear and simple way without the risks or irrational exuberance brought by crypto assets. So the good old switcheroo, you're going to get a CBDC, which is going to give you all the benefits of Bitcoin, but without the dangers, right? And there have been many, many nuggets, right, that we could look at and pull together. This was stated by the US Department of Treasury, I believe, at the end of 2022. A potential US CBDC could also help support, quote, other policy goals. For example, a US CBDC could help ensure that such payment systems are, quote, aligned with the principles of human rights, democratic values, and privacy. Or, translated into what it actually means, a CBDC would be a great tool to force you, the citizen, to act in the way that our overlords wish. Now, a quick comment on FedNow. FedNow is not a CBDC. FedNow, which has been talked about a lot over the last few days, is something going live in the summer on a broader scale. This is a 24/7 real-time payment solution that can do basically instant settlement. I'm not sure all the kind of nuts and bolts of what specific payments we're talking about, but this is not a CBDC per se, where you, the individual, have an account directly with the Federal Reserve or the central bank. But the path is becoming ever clearer, and this now makes a lot of the attacks on stablecoin issuers. You saw them come after Paxos, for example. This is now looking increasingly obvious as a clear the runway strategy. And again, I know I've given a lot of US-based evidence on this, but this is a global phenomenon, particularly in the West. So US, Europe, etc. So the last context-setting question we'll answer is, well, why now? Why does it all seem to be coming out so rapidly? New things every day, new attacks every single day. It is because the fiat banking system is on the ropes. And this is the whole point of what you may have seen from Balaji. So for those not familiar, Balaji was one of the co-founders of Coinbase. Should be taken with a grain of salt because he has shilled all sorts of random crap over the years. But I think what he's doing now is legitimately honorable and is something to be commended. So he famously made a $2 million bet that Bitcoin would be worth $1 million US over the next 90 days. Now, as bullish as I am on Bitcoin, I don't think that's actually what's going to happen, and I don't think he thinks it is either. But he is trying to throw up the bat signal. He's trying to be the Paul Revere that's riding around saying, the printing is coming. The printing is coming. What does he mean by that, and what on earth is going on with the banking system? Well, as we can see in this diagram, banks across the US, and again, this is not just a US phenomenon, but it is certainly most acute in the US, banks are sitting on enormous, giga-sized, unrealized losses. The Treasury, i.e. the federal government, basically strong-arms banks to buy their debt. And this happened in particular fervor during the period of low interest rates that we've seen over the last few years, and especially with all the additional bank reserves sloshing around in the system via the helicopter money, via all the stimulus during COVID and the pandemic and all this stuff. Banks were plowing deposits into long duration treasuries, mortgage-backed securities, etc. Notably, Silicon Valley Bank, who really had most severe of this issue, saw their deposits increase 3x over the span of, I think, 2 years. So as a bank in the traditional fiat system where you have fractional reserves, you need to figure out what to do with all those deposits. You need to loan them out and make productive use of them. But there's simply not enough projects or demand for loanable funds. And so what do? Then you have to park that in these other instruments that can at least give you something. And so that's what happened with this giant influx of deposits. Banks like Silicon Valley and really all of them, this is a systemic thing that happened. They bought a lot of these long duration fixed income instruments with the expectation that maybe the Fed raises rates a little bit, but it's not going to be that bad. Meanwhile, the Fed has raised rates at the fastest rate we've seen in 80 plus years. And so the value or the price of those long duration fixed income assets moves inverse with interest rates. So you now have banks all across the country and indeed elsewhere with huge gaping holes on their balance sheet. Meaning if we were to mark to market or take the value and make them realize those losses, their assets are less than liabilities, i.e. the deposits that they owe their customers. So make no mistake, this is the literal definition of insolvency. The entire banking system is insolvent right now. Now, the average individual may say, well, look, I get insured up to $250,000 in deposits for the FDIC. So I'm not that worried. But think about all the small businesses that have more than that. Think of the game theory that this kicks off, right? If you know that the government is going to backstop the big banks, but maybe not so much the small ones. And Janet Yellen, there's a great video circulating around of her answering, I believe it was an Oklahoman regulator who's asking, well, what happens to my community banks? Are you going to backstop them in the same way that you did, these other examples? And Janet Yellen literally looks him in the face and says, well, the FDIC in consultation with me make a judgment. We humans make a decision about what's systemically risky or not. And so there have now been huge cries for, hey, you need to protect and backstop all the deposits, all of them. And so we saw the introduction of the Bank Term Funding Project, which promised to inject up to $300 billion in liquidity. And whoopsies, that went quick. That went in literally the span of 1 week. Or as Bianco Research says here, in other words, in just 1 week, the Fed reversed roughly half of all the QT it accomplished over the past year. So the Fed's balance sheet has essentially teleported higher by $300 billion. So there's now another $2 trillion that's going to be made available or up to that to backstop the full system. So you see where all of this is going. This is what Balaji is saying. The whole system is insolvent and they are going to inject liquidity. They're going to do it under sneaky names. They're not going to call it quantitative easing, but they're going to inject liquidity in these different ways, prevent the system from collapsing chaotically. This will devalue the dollars that you have in the bank, which aren't yours, right? You made an unsecured loan to your bank, and you're praying that it's still there when you go to take it out or when you go to use it. And again, with all these backstops, maybe that actually is true, but the purchasing power of what you have, make no mistake, is programmed to go down over time. And people sense this. People sense that something's wrong. Something is deeply, deeply wrong here. And I think what's really interesting, people have been asking, Bitcoin's price action, is this indicative of finally realizing this sort of safe haven narrative? It's, the safe asset from the banks. I don't know that that can fully explain what we've seen and how Bitcoin is holding up quite well. I think there's another part of it that is, well, given what's unfolding, the Fed surely must pause its rate hikes sooner than what otherwise would be the case. And that is certainly true. The yield curve is predicting that, despite the 25 basis point rate hike we just saw yesterday. But I do think it's part of it. I do think people are waking up to the value of an asset with zero counterparty risk that cannot be confiscated. And so on that note, with all of that nonsense from Clown World, let's talk about the practical tools that you can be using to protect yourself, to protect your family from what is coming. All right, so I know that was a lot of preamble to get to the practical part, but for those of you watching who might be a little bit newer to all of this, or perhaps you have friends and family that aren't quite there on the learning curve as you are, hopefully some of what we covered is a helpful documentation of just how serious a situation this is. Let's now talk about the practical tools that you need to get familiar with if you are not already. Number one is going to be some way to acquire or trade Bitcoin in a peer-to-peer fashion. If all the KYC or know your customer on and off ramps, all these centralized entities are getting increasingly squeezed, you need to have a contingency plan. You need to be comfortable with at least one method that doesn't rely on a centralized exchange. So, what are my favorite methods for this? Number one has to be Bisq. I think Bisq is probably the most complete peer-to-peer platform where you can buy and sell Bitcoin across a variety of different fiat payment methods. You could go on to, for example, Amazon.com, buy a gift card, and that's your form of payment, right? So there's a lot of flexibility in how you can do, and I have done a whole tutorial on Bisq. I will leave all of these links in the description down below for you to take a look at, and I will also link them here in the video itself. But Bisq would be probably my number one. Second would be RoboSats. RoboSats is a phenomenal platform that really excels in UX, the user experience, which is oftentimes lacking from these peer-to-peer platforms. And so once again, I've done a whole tutorial on RoboSats. RoboSats by default occurs over the Lightning Network. So a very, very nice option to have in your arsenal. You also have cash vouchers like Azteco. So you could go to azte.co and look for locations that may be near you depending on where you live, but they're all over the place. They're all over globally. I think there's things like Peach Bitcoin now for Europe. I've shown this in prior videos, but have a look at KYC Not Me. This is the most complete resource for all the different peer-to-peer ways. What are the trade-offs? Do they require no KYC, a little bit under certain circumstances? Great, great, great resource to have in mind. Other ways you can acquire Bitcoin, of course, mining. Now you want to be really, really careful. I would not at this point suggest something like Compass as a hosted solution. I have personal experience with Compass as a customer, and I would say that it's an okay option, right? It has not been smooth. And even if they did excel in the areas in which they don't, you still want to consider the fact that not your machine's not your hash rate. And so if you're going to go the mining route, I really think you want to rip the Band-Aid and do it at home. You may say, well, that's, it's just impossible. Number one, if you get solid machines like S19 Pros, which are currently trading at like pretty reasonable prices, you could go on something like NiceHash, and buy some of these machines. You can buy them new, you can buy them used, and then check out this guide from Econo Alchemist, which I still think is the best, most encompassing how-to guide on how to mine at home. I'm not saying it's for everyone. It most certainly is not. But I think you owe it to yourself at least to consider the possibility of, well, what if? Could I do this? So take a look there. Now, if you just absolutely have to, for whatever reason, maybe you're panic FOMO buying because you know the on and off ramps are getting squeezed, you absolutely, for whatever reason, have to use some sort of centralized option, I would encourage you to use something like Swan. You can use my link in the description if you want to get an extra little bit of Bitcoin when you sign up and actually make a purchase. Or perhaps something like Strike. But again, I don't even care about that affiliate link. I am encouraging you to first and foremost use those peer-to-peer options if at all possible. All right, so that is acquiring Bitcoin. Now that you've acquired Bitcoin, you need to practice self-custody. I would hope that most of you watching this are already doing this, but if you are not, you need to take self-custody and you need to do it right now, today. And so you might say, well, Ian, I don't have a cold storage, hardware device. That's fine. It doesn't matter. Download Sparrow Wallet, which is a desktop wallet. Withdraw your funds to something like Sparrow Wallet. For your long-term self-custody, my favorites are the Cold Card Mark IV, which I have done a whole tutorial on, as well as the Foundation Devices Passport Batch 2, again, which I have done a whole tutorial on. I will give a shout out to Keystone. I think they're pretty underloved in the Bitcoin community, but this nice big touchscreen that they have, I think is really nice, honestly, from a user experience standpoint. They do have Bitcoin only firmware for those concerned about the fact that they do support other cryptocurrencies. So those are some options there for self-custody. Again, do not wait to take self-custody onto a hardware device. You can go ahead and do that using something like Sparrow. And again, I've done a whole tutorial on Sparrow Wallet. Speaking of Sparrow Wallet, you may want to consider privacy techniques such as CoinJoin transactions, which are nothing more than collaborative transactions where you're participating with other users on the network to essentially blend in. It would be like me looking out my window and looking at someone standing in the road. That person is pretty easy to kind of pinpoint. But if there was the same person dressed in all the same attire, dressed in the same mask, and many of them, it would be much, much harder for me to pick you out in the crowd. That is the conceptual analogy of what a collaborative CoinJoin transaction is. And for that, there is no one better in the game than Samurai Wallet for a mobile option. I've done tutorials on how to de-Google your Pixel phone if you want, and then do Samurai Wallet on there. Or you can get the benefits of Samurai Wallet's Whirlpool CoinJoin implementation in Sparrow Wallet as a nice desktop option if perhaps you don't have an Android, which is a requirement for the Samurai Wallet mobile app. And then finally, and it pains me to say this, I still deeply love the values that America stood for and still to some degree stand for. And make no mistake, there are millions of incredible people here and millions upon millions of incredible people all around the world who are freedom loving, who simply wish to create value in the world and live their lives without being suffocated and sucked dry for everything they're worth by government and bureaucratic parasites. But it is unfortunately also time to think about your jurisdictional contingency plan. What do I mean by that? It means really seriously thinking about and researching where you might move with your feet if we continue on this trend that I'm describing. Now, the US dollar is not imminently going to collapse. It's not going to collapse tomorrow or even in the next 90 days or even this year. But make no mistake, empires do not last forever. And unfortunately, the dollar system is terminal and is arguably already fraying at the edges significantly, as reflected in the domestic banking system and as represented internationally in the increasing use of other currencies to settle international trade. And so what does this mean in practice? It means do some research on those jurisdictions that are going to promote and preserve freedom more than others. If you're in the US, this means places like Texas and Florida, which have already come out and said either I'm against CBDCs or, hey, if you use Bitcoin, we will protect your rights to, hold Bitcoin, all this good stuff. Wyoming's made a lot of strides as well. Tennessee to some degree. You may also consider other places. The world is a truly humongous place. You have obvious ideas like El Salvador that have openly embraced this. You have the territory of Madeira. You have pockets in the Philippines and Vietnam, increasingly in South America. So make no mistake, we are going to see the jurisdictional arbitrage being played out. You're going to see a large migration of people that are simply fed up at having their life force sucked dry. And so all I'm suggesting at this point is that you at least think through it. You at least put some thought and research into it. Again, I don't think this happens overnight. If you're not at least thinking about it, I don't think you're thinking adversarial enough. And I think you might be giving too much faith into, oh, well, my government will never do that to me. They literally could care less about you. They do not care about you at all, other than your capacity to produce taxes for them. That's it. So with all that, let's go ahead and conclude today's video. So today was a spicy one and a sobering one, but it was something I felt obligated to say. Again, many of you watching may be already very familiar and aware of what is unfolding in that first section of the video. But for those that you love, your family, your friends, who maybe aren't, hopefully this is a condensed version of all the crazy stuff happening in terms of this Operation Chokepoint movement, in terms of closing the exit doors to the failing fiat system, and in terms of how the fiat system is failing before our very eyes. And so we then talked about some of the practical tools that you need to be aware of, that you need to be using, that you need to be proficient with. Don't wait until the very last minute. Get proficient on these tools now, including how to acquire Bitcoin. We talked about things like BISC, RoboSats, maybe do a little bit of home mining if you can, if you have the ability to. We talked about self-custody, cold card, foundation devices passport. We talked about privacy techniques, use Sparrow Wallet, which has the embedded Samurai Wallet Whirlpool implementation. And we talked about a jurisdictional contingency plan, Where would you physically move yourself and your family if things were to really, really go downhill? But there you go, my friends. I hope you found this valuable and insightful. If you did, you already know what to do. Give this video a like. Use the share feature underneath this video. That really does help get this to a broader audience, which I think is critical. How many people do you know who are just absolutely sleepwalking through all of this, having no clue of what's going on? Is probably the vast majority of people that you know. So we need to get the word out more broadly about this stuff. We need to throw up the bit signal, as Balaji calls it. And we need to help those that we love get prepared and at least have a contingency plan. Maybe everything goes fine. Maybe we discover miraculous productivity boosting technology, such as small scale nuclear fusion power, right? Like maybe it happens, but if that's your bet, good luck. Now, if you were so enamored by this content and you want to donate, which really does help me continue to make these types of videos, there are a number of ways you can do that. If you're using something like the Get Alby browser extension, you can simply click that bad boy and send sats that way, or you could donate through my Strike account and Lightning address that you will see on the final page momentarily. But with all of that, if nothing else you took from today, it is to prepare for war. We are in the then they fight you phase. We will see more challenges. We will see more chaos, but focus on controlling what you can control and remember what happens on the other side. Until next time, my friends, I'll see you then.